The doors were cracked open, just as he had left them so many years ago, and lying there, encrusted with snow, but just where he had dropped it, was the iron bar that he had used to open the doors. The smell might not be there, for what he knew, because he was now wearing an air mask. They had left just as soon as they could see to fly, and Johnny had spotted them down accurately just before the door. Behind him in the canyon, the Scots were unloading gear. The plane would have to leave, and they would have to obliterate all tracks with the snow before the recon drone came over on its daily round. The calm voice of Robert the Fox was directing them. "Have you got the lamps? Check the air bottles. Where's the Daniel? Say those explosives!" A Scot came up with a sledgehammer to open the door wider, and Angus rushed over and pushed him aside. No, it's not wanting a bit of penetrating oil, don't we all? Angus was popping open an oil can. The voice sounded muffled through the air mask. They were all getting air masks on. The historian had found it was very unhealthy to enter tombs, something called spores, something that came off the bone dust of the long dead, and a man made his cough his lungs out. "Mind if I slip in first, Johnny?" said Angus. Johnny took his shoulder pack so that Angus could slide through. The mine lamp played on the interior. "Ach, enough dead men!" The oil can was popping on hinges. "Try it now, Johnny." Johnny put his shoulder to the doors and he swung back, shooting a blast of light down the stairs. Angus had stepped out of the way and was now wading on littered corpses, puffs of bone dust rising around his boots. They all stood for a moment looking down the steps with awe. On this graveyard of a planet there were no strangers to dead remains. They lay in structures and basements in abundance, wherever or whatever the protection from odd animals or the weather. Corpses more than 1,000 years dead. But reaching down this long flight of stairs were the remains of several hundred men, protected from the air until a dozen years ago. Their clothing, arms, and equipment were somewhat preserved, but the bones had gone to powder. "This fell forward," said Robert the Fox. "Must have been a regiment marching in. See, these two fellows at the top of the steps must have been closing the doors." "The gas," said Johnny. "They opened the doors to let in the regiment. Looks like the gas hit them down the canyon." "Wipe the place out," said Robert the Fox. "Listen, all of you, don't go in there without a tight air mask on." "We ought to bury these men," said the parson. "They each have little tags on them." He picked one up. "Nolan's, Peter, Private, USMC, number blah, 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 blood type B. "Marines," said the historian. "We've got a military base here, all right." "Do you suppose," said the parson to Johnny, "that village of yours could once have been a marine base? Is it different than the other towns?" "The village has been rebuilt a dozen times," said Johnny. "Robert, let's go in." "Remember your priorities," said Robert to the group. "Inventory only. Don't touch records until they've been identified. This is a big place. Don't stray or get lost." "We ought to bury these bodies," said the parson. We will, said Sir Robert. "All in good time. Gunners forward. Flush at the end. Destroy any animals you find." 5 Scots carrying submachine guns raced down the steps, alert for bears or snakes in hibernation or stray wolves. "Ventilation team, stand by," said Robert. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure the 3 assigned to carry the heavy mine ventilation fans were there and ready. There was an uneven burst of fire from below. The sub-Thompson machine ammunition was dud for 2 rounds out of 5, and to get a sustained burst one had to recock the bolts in mid-fire. Robert's small limited-range radio crackled. "Rattlesnakes, fire! All dead, incom!" "Aye," said Robert the Fox into the mic. There was another ragged burst of fire. The radio crackled. "Brown bear, hibernating, dead bitch, incom!" "Aye," said Sir Robert. Second set of doors, tight, locked. Just like the anus. "Explosives team," Robert called over his shoulder. No, said Angus. "We may need those doors." "Go ahead," said Sir Robert. "Belay explosives teams, but stand by." Into the mic. "Mechanic, en route." They waited. The radio crackled. "Doors open." There was a pause. "Area bound, seems aimed tight. Probably no hostile animals beyond. End to come." "Ventilation team, forward," said Robert. The last man on that team was carrying a cage of rats. Purposely and presently a current of air began to come out of the tomb. The radio crackled. "Rats still alive. End come. There you are, Nock Tyler." Johnny checked his face mask and walked down through the dust of the stairs. He heard Robert the Fox firing the rest of the teams behind him and then giving orders to clean up the outside area and dust all traces with snow when the planes have left. The orders sounded far off and thin in the booming caverns of the primary defense base of a long-dead nation. Johnny's miner's lamp played upon the floors and walls of what seemed like endless corridors and rooms. The place was huge. Offices, barracks, storerooms. Their footsteps resounded hollowly, disturbing the millennia-long sleep of the dead. The first find was a stack of duplicated routing plans for the base. A Scot found them in a reception desk drawer. They were not very detailed, apparently intended to route visiting officers around. The Scot got permission to distribute them, and racing up, miner's lamp bobbing away, shoved a copy into Johnny's hand. Level after level existed. There was not just a maze of one level, but also mazes down, down, and down. He was looking for an operations office, somewhere where dispatches might mount up, where information was collected. Operations? Where would that be? Behind him, an argument had broken out. It was Angus and Robert the Fox at the other end of the corridor. Angus's voice was raised. I know it's all by the elevators. I'm sorry for doing Irish. For some reason, I can't do Scottish. There was a murmur from Robert. I know, it's all electrical. I've been through all this before at the first school. Electrical. It takes generators, and they're just piles of congealed rust. Even if you've got one to run, there's no fuel. It's just sludge in the tanks, and even if you put in juice, these light bulbs wouldn't work, and the electric motors are frozen solid. Robert murmured something. Sure, the wires may be all right, but even if you got juice in them, all you'd have is an intercom, and we've got that. So stick to miner's lamps. I'm sorry, Sir Robert, but there's just so much dinosaur you can revive on a pile of bones. Johnny heard Robert laughing. He himself differed a little bit from Angus's point of view. They did not know if there was no emergency system. They could work, you never know. There might be some other way. And they did not know now there might not be has never heard of a comma. And they did not know that there might not be other fuels in sealed containers that might still function. The chances were thin, but they could not be ruled out. They were desperately going to rig mine cables so the other levels could go and explore, when a Scot found ramps and stairwells going down. Operations! They found a communications console. The communications remains at the desk. Under the desk, that had been his hand, was a message. Urgent! Don't fire! It wasn't the Russians. Russians? Russians, said the Scot. Who were the Russians? Thor had come, absent without leave from his shift at the load, but intending to get back. He was part Swedish. There's some people that used to live on the other side of Sweden. They were run by the Swedes once. Don't fucking think so. Don't disturb any messages. Operations. They found themselves in an enormous room. It had a huge map of the world on the middle table. Apparently clerks with long poles pushed little models around on the map. There were sidewall maps and a balcony overlooking. Miners' lamps flickered over maps, models, and the remains of the dead. Impressive and well preserved. There were loads and lots of clocks, all stopped long ago. A crude, hastily made cylinder model rested upon the map just east of the Rockies. A long pole had been plotting its course, and the last X on the map was directly above this base. It was too much data to sort out in just a moment. Johnny went on looking. They found themselves in a nearby room. It had lots of consoles. Top secret was the name of the room. One console said local defense and had a chart and a map over it. Johnny went to look at it, and he saw very closely it said TNW minefield. Then suddenly he found himself looking at marks on a string, the mines in the meadows below them, TNW15. There was a firing button, TNW15, but there were rows and rows of these buttons. TNW. What is TNW? The reedy voice of the historian piped up behind him. TNW means tactical nuclear weapons. Those are the mines. Angus came over. Electrical firing buttons! You push the button here and off they go. Might also be fused for contact, said Johnny cautiously. No wonder the silos thought these mountains were radioactive. What's a silo, said the parson. It says silo 1, silo 2, and so on. A silo, said Thor, is where you keep wheat. They used to have them in Sweden, before the Jews blew them all up. You put wheat in them for storage. Can't imagine why they'd be that interested in wheat. Look at the way the buttons are marked. Stand by, ready, fire. The historian was hastily rifling through a dictionary. He habitually carried it wherever he went. He found it. 1. A cylindrical upright storage facility for wheat, grain, and other foodstuff. Also very good for making beer. Number 2. A large underground structure for the storage and launching of long-range ballistic missiles. Johnny reached out and grabbed the parson's wrist. Don't touch that console. It could contain emergency systems about which we know nothing. He turned, excited. Robert, get this whole board and layout picture recorded. We have to know the exact location of every silo on that board. Those missiles might have uranium within them. They were in a storeroom area now. Angus had found a huge ring of keys and was scampering ahead of Johnny, opening doors. Robert the Fox was following more sedately. He had his worn-out cape wrapped very tightly about him, for it was bitterly cold in this place. Probably the temperature seldom rose very much, even within the summer. Robert's radio crackled occasionally, as some Scots else reported in. The radios worked well underground, designed for miner's use. Johnny had not yet found all he wanted, not by a long shot. The planning of a battle against an enemy whose battle tactics were all but unknown was a chancy business, and he did not yet know exactly how the silos had done it. So he had half an ear to Robert's radio, and was not paying all that much attention to Angus. There were a heavy door that said, Arsenal, and Angus was changing the keys to open it. Some faint hope that it might contain nuclear weapons rose within Johnny. The door opened. Boxes, cases, endless rows of them. Johnny played his lamp over the stencils. He did not know what all these letters meant. The military seemed to love obscure things under letters and numbers. Angus danced up with the book, fluttering the well-preserved pages. Ordnance types and models, he crooned. All the numbers and letters will be here, even the pickies. Inventory that, said Robert the Fox to a Scot beside him who was making lists. Bazooka, said Angus. There, up there, those long boxes. Anti-tank, armor-piercing, missile projectiles. Nuclear, said Johnny. Non-nuclear, so it says. I think, said Robert, this is just their local arsenal, possibly for base use only. They wouldn't be supplying the whole army from this spot. Lots of it, though, said Angus. Enough for a few thousand men, said Robert. Can you open a box, Angus? 1 or 2 for now, just to ascertain condition. A couple of the Scots followed him to assist. Angus was flipping through the catalogue, miner's lamp dancing on the pages. Ah, here! Thompson, submachine gun. He looked it up and down in the boxes. He wondered, no wonder. No wonder what, said Robert. He's getting a little bit impatient. The recon drone must have passed overhead by this time, and they had had no lunch and needed a break to recharge the air bottles outside. That ammunition we found was very well preserved, airtight. Well, it maybe had to be. The sub-Thompson machine gun was a century out of date when we found the truckload. They must have just been sending them to the cadets to practice with. They were relics. Johnny was not about to try to fight silos with sub-Thompson machine guns. He started to pass on by. Boxes were being opened behind him. Angus raced up. His lamp was shining on an all-metal, lightweight hand rifle. It was block-solid, covered with grease that ages ago had formed into a tight, hard cast. Mark 50 assault rifle, said Angus. The last thing they issued. I can clean it up, so these will... Johnny nodded. It was a sleek weapon. Magazine, said the door ahead of him. It was a doubly thick door, and it meant ammunition. Maybe tactical nuclear weapons? Angus let another Scot open it for him. He was back there rummaging through cases. A box right ahead, standing among vast tiers of boxes, said, Ammunition, Mark 50 assault. Johnny took a jimmy out of his belt and pried open the top. It was not airtight. The box and the cardboard dividers were decayed and strained and stained. The brass was okay and the bullet was clean, but the primer at the bottom, it told its tale. The ammunition was dud. He called Angus and showed him the cartridge. They went on looking for nuclear weapons, more storerooms and more storerooms. Then, pay dirt. Johnny found himself looking at literally thousands of outfits neatly arranged on shelves, even with sizes, complete with shoes, face-plated helmets, packed in a kind of plastic that was airtight and nearly imperishable. Combat, radiation, protection uniforms. His excited hands ripped open a package, lead-impregnated clothing, lead glass faceplates, and in mountain camouflage, grey, tan, and green. Riches, the one thing that would let them handle radiation. He showed Robert the Fox, and Robert put it on the radio as real news, but told the others to go on with their own searches and make their own inventories. They were on their way outside for food and air when another piece of news came through. It was Donaldine. Apparently he had relieved 4 and had to go on shift at the mine, and Donaldine wasn't even supposed to be there. "We got some great big huge security safes up here," said Donaldine's voice over the radio. "No combination. One is marked top secret nuclear and classified personnel only, and manuals. We need an explosives team. End com." He guided them to him. Robert the Fox looked at Angus, and Angus shook his head. "No keys." The explosive team rigged non-flame blasting cartridge to all the hinges, and everyone went into the next corridor, while the explosive teams trailed wire. They held their ears, and the concussion was head-splitting. A moment later they heard the crash of a door hitting the floor. The fire members of the team rushed in with an extinguisher, but it was not needed. Lamps beamed through the settling dust. Presently they were holding in their hands operation manuals, maintenance manuals, repair manuals, hundreds and hundreds of separate manuals that gave every particular of every nuclear device that had been built how to set it, fire it, fuse and defuse it, store it, handle it, and safeguard it. "Now we've got everything but the nuclear devices," said Robert the Fox. "Yes," said Johnny. "You can't shoot with paper, but you can wipe your ass with it." It must have been night outside, but nothing could be darker than the deep guts of this ancient defense base. The black seemed to press in upon them through possessed, as though it possessed its own actual weight. The miners' lamps were darting shafts through ink. They had come down a ramp, gone through an air-sealed door, and found an enormous cavern. The sign said heliport. The time-decayed bulks of collapsed metal that stood along the walls had been some kind of planes with large fans on top. Johnny had seen pictures of them in the man books, and they were called helicopters. He stared at the one, single one sitting in the middle of the vast floor. The small party of Scots were with him. They were very interested in something else, the doors. They were huge. They were made of metal, reaching far to the right and far to the left, and up beyond their sight. Another entrance in the base, a fly-in entrance for their type of craft. Angus was scrambling around some motors to the side of the door. Electrical. I wonder if these poor lads ever thought there would be a day when you had to do something manually. "What if the power failed?" "It failed," said Robert the Fox, his voice booming in the vast hangar. "Call me the lamp boy," said Angus, and presently 2 Scots who were packing lamps, batteries, and wires and fuses for their own lighting trotted down the ramp, pushing their gear ahead of them on a dolly they had found. Hammering began over by the motors and trying to operate the doors. Robert the Fox came over to Johnny. "If we can get those doors open and clip them to close again, we can fly in and fly out of here. There's a sighting port over there, and it shows the outside. There's a cave opening, so nobody can look in. We'd be completely invisible to the drone." Johnny nodded, but he was looking at the central helicopter. The air was different here. He could feel it on his hands. It was drier. He went over to the helicopter. Yes, there was his eagle, with arrows in its claws. Dim but huge on the side of this machine, not like the other machines, which had a minor insignia. He made up the letters. President of the United States. This was a special plane. And if it's 2024, it's a special president. "I must go and nick a baby." The historian answered his pointing finger. Head of the country, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, appointed by Jewish people. Johnny was puzzled. Yes, possibly he had gotten here on that day of disaster 1,000 or more years ago. But if so, where was he? There had been no such sign on the offices. He walked around the hangar. Ha! Another elevator. A smaller one in a different place. He looked further and found a door to a stairwell that led upwards. The door was hard to open, apparently air-sealed. He got through it and apparently it was a bit of a climb. He mounted the steps upward. Behind him, the hammer and clang of the group faded and died away. There was only the soft pat of his feet on the stairs. Another air-sealed door at the top. This one even harder to open. Back to being no. There was an entirely different complex. It stood independent from the rest of the base, and it seemed, due to the dry air, the seals, and possibly something else, the bodies were not dust. They were mummified. Officers on the floor, slumped over desks, but only a few. Communication and file rooms, a briefing room with a few chairs, a bar with glasses and bottles intact. Woohoo! Very superior grade of furnishings, carpets, all very well preserved. And then he saw the door symbol he was looking for, and he went inside. The sign on the splendid polished desk, a huge eagle plaque upon the wall, a flag, with some of this fabric still able to stir when he caused a slight breeze. The man was slumped over the desk, mummified. Even his clothing still looked neat. Johnny looked under the parchment head, on the parchment thin hand, and without touching it, he slid out the sheaf of papers. The top date and the hour were two days later than the ones that he'd seen before. The only explanation Johnny could think of was that the ventilation systems didn't join, that when the gas hit the main base, the system was turned off in here, and they had not dared to turn it back on. The president and his staff had died from lack of air. Johnny felt strangely courteous and respectful. As he removed more papers from the desk and the trays, he held in his hands the last hours of this world, report by report, even pictures from something from up high called satellite pictures. He hastily skimmed through the reports to make sure he had it all. A strange object had appeared over London without any trace of where it came from. Teleportation. It had been at an altitude of 30,000 feet. Important, thought Johnny. It had dropped a canister, and within minutes, the south of England was dead. Silo gas. The myth and the legends. It had cruised eastward at 302.6 miles per hour. Vital data. It had been attacked by fighter planes from Norway. It had not fought back. It had been hit with everything it had without the slightest evidence of any damage to it. Armor. An interchange on something called the hotline prevented a nuclear missile exchange between the United States and Russia. The "don't fire, it isn't the Russians" message on the desk from the other complex, thought Johnny. It was hit with nuclear weapons over Germany, without the slightest apparent damage. No pilots, thought Johnny. It was a heavy drone. Just a drone with no breathe gas. Very heavy motors. It then toured the major population centers of the world, dropping canisters and wiping out populations. And wiped out the other complex of this base without even knowing or caring what it was here. On the operations map on the other complex, they had plotted it only just to the east of this location, and then it went on to obliterate the eastern part of the United States. The report had come in from the Dew Line stations in the Arctic and some parts of Canada. It continued on its almost leisurely way to wipe out all population centers in the southern hemisphere. But at this point, something else began to happen. Isolated observers and satellite reports said that tanks of a strange design were materializing one after the other in various parts of the world and mopping up the fleeing hordes of humanity. Stage 2. Teleportation. Military reports, out of sequence and incomplete, were shuffled in with the reports of the tanks, All major military airfield installations, whether gassed out of existence or not, were being blown to bits by strange, very fast flying craft. Battleplanes, teleported in at the same time as the tanks. Reports of some tanks exploding, some battle planes exploding. Reasons not known. Manned craft, thought Johnny. Breeze gas, hitting areas of radiation caused by firing on a drone with nuclear weapons. The drone spotted by satellite, landing near Colorado City. Colorado. Causes most structures there to collapse. Preset remote control, thought Johnny. Even their central command mine site had been picked out in advance. The whole area carefully plotted and observed by casting picture recorders. Rough, uncontrolled landing of drone near a pre-planned command center. A tank spotted by satellite shooting at a pocket of cadets wearing light flight oxygen masks of the Air Force Academy. Report by acting commander of Corps of Cadets. Then no further communication. The last battle. Efforts from the con room to contact somebody, anybody, anywhere, via a remote antenna located 300 miles to the north. Antenna location bombed by enemy battleplane. Radio tracking. Unspotted, but with their air shut off, the president and his aides and staff had lasted 2 more hours until they died of asphyxiation. Johnny put the papers respectfully in a protected mine bag. Feeling a bit strange for speaking, he said to the corpse, "I'm sorry no help came. We're something over 1,000 years late." He felt bad. His gloom would have been followed him as he left the dreary, dark, cold quarters, if it had not been for the barking, cheery voice of Donnelly springing from the radio. Johnny halted and acknowledged the transmission. "Johnny, laddie," said Donnelly. "You could have stuck yourself worrying about scraping uranium out of the dirt at your full nuclear arsenal, complete with assorted bombs intact just 30 miles north of here. We found the map of the plane, just checked it out. Now all we got to worry about is blowing up our innocent little heads and exploding this whole planet in the bargain." Disaster struck in the form of an earthquake on day 32 of the new year. Shortly after midnight, the tremor awakened Johnny. The equipment on his bureau in the London Palace Elite Hotel rattled together, and he sat up in his bed. The prolonged throb of vibration was still occurring. The old building groaned with pain and strain. The rumble of the earthquake travelled on. It was followed by a second, lesser tremor, a half-minute later, and then that was finally gone. It was not too unusual in the Rockies. No damage seemed to be done in the old mining town. Uneasy, but not really alarmed, Johnny put on his buckskin pants and his moccasins, and, throwing a puma skin over his shoulders, he sprinted through the snow to the Empire Dauntless. The duty sentry's light was on, and a young Scot was tapping a buzzer key that activated the communication system to the mine. It was a directional laser radio, limited to an exact width and undetectable beyond these mountains. The Scot looked up. His face was a bit white. "They don't answer." He tapped the key again, more rapidly, although his finger itself he could shoot the beam through. Maybe the receiver pole got twisted in the quake. In minutes, Johnny had the relief crew routed out, spare ropes and winches assembled, blankets and stimulants packaged and being loaded onto the passenger plane. Strained faces turned repeatedly toward the mine, even though it was far into their line of sight. They were worried for the mine duty there. 4, a shift leader named Dwight, and 15 other men. The night was black as coal. Even the stars were masked by high invisible clouds. It was no mean stunt flying on these mountains in the dark. The instruments of the mine plane, they were glowing green. The ship vaulted up higher and higher. The image screen painted a blurred picture of the train ahead of them. Johnny adjusted it to make it more sharp. Beside him, a co-pilot made some console plane weight corrections. Johnny was depending on his eyes to avoid the first mountain slope. He flipped on the plane's beam lights. They struck the snow slope, and he eased the plane up and over it. He knew that things had been going too well. They had been making real progress in their preparations. They were far from ready, but what they had accomplished had been miraculous. He hunted ahead, and for the next mountainside, checking the view scheme. Good Lord, it was dark. He checked his compass. The men in the back were tense and silent. He could almost feel what they were thinking. The top node flipped under them a little too close. Where was the next one? The assault rifles he had at the very beginning considered worthless were proving the very thing. With a great deal of ingenuity they had salvaged the ammunition. They had drawn out the bullets from the case and tapped out the primer. By careful experimentation they had found out how to substitute a blasting cap in the bottom of the shell casing. At first they had thought they would also need powder, and had blown up a rifle trying it. No casualties, though. It turned out that the blasting cap was enough to fire a bullet at high velocity. Johnny swerved the plane to avoid a suddenly looming cliff and went a little higher. If he went too high, he would lose his way entirely, for lights were out of the mine. His lights were also becoming visible at the compound. Stay low, dangerous, but stay low. Then they had taken the bullets and drilled a small hole in their nose. Wearing radiation suits, inserted a grain of radioactive material from a TNW. They had covered this with a thin bit of melted lead. In this way, a man could carry the ammunition without danger of radiation hitting him. But when it was fired, oh my! They had tried it on a breathe gas in a glass bottle. And did that breathe gas explode? Yes, it did. Too low. Johnny had recognized a lone scrub on a ridge. He lifted the plane up and over it. They were on course. Hold down the speed. Hold down the speed. Don't have another disaster flying in the dark. The bullets were also armor-piercing, to a certain degree, and when fired into a breathe gas vial 200 yards away, caused a violent reaction that brought concussion all the way back to them. They put every available Scot onto an assembly line, converting bullets. They had cases and cases of them now, all ready to go. 100 assault rifles and 500 magazines had been cleaned to perfection. They fired without stutter and not a single dud. No good against a tank or a thick lead glass compound dome, but those assault rifles would be deadly to individual silos. With breathe gas in their bloodstreams, they would literally explode, you sadistic bastard. He spotted the river that ran out of the gorge. He eased down. He followed it, the plane's lights flashing upon the uneven ice and snow. They'd been so happy about the assault rifles that they had gone to work on the bazookas. They had even found some nuclear artillery shells and had converted their noses onto the bazookas. And now they had armor-piercing nuclear bazookas. These days they call it depleted uranium. There is still a number of those left to make. I mean, yes, it had been too smooth, too good to be true. There were no lights on for the mine pad ahead. There was no one visible down there at all. He set the plane down on the pad. The passengers boiled out of it. Their lights darted this way and that. One of them, who had run to the chasm edge, called back. His voice was thin in the cold darkness. "Johnny!" The cliff face. It's gone. A light shone down from the present edge and confirmed it. The fissure, 30 feet back from the old edge, has simply opened in the earthquake and fallen into the gorge. It reminds me of a girl called Jenny. You fall into her gorge, you never see her again. The cliff face was no longer overhanging, it sloped up toward them. In the light, the wide edge of the broken off quartz lode was visible. It was pure white, the best colour. No gold in the remaining vein. The pocket of gold, it was gone. But Johnny was thinking right now of the crew. They had not reached the fissure, for the avalanche had exposed no tunnel. They were somehow trapped underneath them, if they were still alive. Johnny raced back to the shaft edge. It yawned blackly. That's a bad colour. A large circle of emptiness, silent. The shaft was about 100 feet deep. Back to Johnny. He looked around, flashing his light. The hoist! Where is the hoist? The entire apparatus used to take out ore and lower than raising the men was missing. Lights played down the mountain. It was not upon the slope. Johnny approached the hole more closely. Then he saw the slide marks of the crossed timbers that they had used to support the hoist over the haird. The hoist was down there in the shaft. "Be very quiet, everyone," said Johnny. Then he bent over and cupped his hands. He shouted down, "Down there, is anyone alive?" They listened. "I thought I heard something," said the parson, who had stowed away again. He does like his men in miniskirts. Yet you're on a mountain, it's winter, you're freezing, and they're still wearing miniskirts. Frickin' transvestites. Johnny tried again. They listened. They could not be sure, but Johnny turned on his belt radio and spoke into it. No answer. He saw Angus in a rescue team. Angus! Drop an intercom on a cable and get it down that hole. While Angus and 2 others were doing that, Johnny pulled out a picture recorder from the rescue gear. He found more cable and extended its leads. Angus had rigged and lowered the intercom. Johnny signalled to the parson. Leave them boys alone. The place was broadly lit now with lamps. The relief crew had put them on poles. The parson's hand was shaking as he held the intercom mic. Hello, the main! The intercom mic down there should pick up any voices, if there would be any reply. There wasn't. Keep trying, said Johnny. He set out the line and the picture recorder and lowered it down into the hole. Robert the Fox stepped forward from the relief group and he took charge of the portable screen. At first it was just a shaft wall sliding by as the picture recorder went down to Jenny's vagina. Then a piece of timber, then a tangle of cable, then the hoist. Johnny rotated the cable and Jenny squealed and shifted the remote control. She was massive. The hoist was empty. A sigh of relief joined the night wind as the tense group saw that no one had been killed in the hoist. Johnny worked the remote to look over the hoist. It was hard, to tell, but it did not appear there was anybody crushed under the fallen hoist. The picture recorder swung idly on its cable, 90 feet below them, eyes straining at the view screen, begging it for data. No drift hole, said Johnny. The drift hole isn't visible. When the hoist fell, it caved in the entrance and adrift down there. Pressing a flying platform into service, they flew a 3-man crew down to the bottom of the drift. Robert the Fox couldn't let Johnny go down on it. No, nobody. One of the men dropped down from the platform and fixed lifting hooks to the cage cable, and he pulled it back up to the top of the hole. They rigged a crane, pulleys, and a winch, and 33 minutes later, clocked by the historian who had also sneaked aboard the relief things, he also got a thing for transvestites. They had to hoist out the shaft and were setting off to the side. Johnny put the picture recorder back down and it confirmed his guess. The shaft end of the level drift down there was blocked, knocked shut when the hoist fell. They rigged buckets to crane cables and very shortly had 4 men down there at the bottom. Johnny ignored Robert the Fox and went down this time himself. They tore the rocks with their bare hands, filling buckets and shot aloft to be replaced by empty ones. More tools and the welcome sledges came down. 2 hours went by. They changed 3 of the men twice, but Johnny refused to leave. They worked in a blur of speed, the rattle of rocks and the thud of sledges, freeing them resounding from the dusty hole bottom. The rock fall was thicker than they had hoped. 2 feet from the drift. 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. Maybe the whole drift had collapsed. They didn't. They changed crews. Johnny stayed down there. 3 hours and 16 minutes after their arrival at the bottom, Johnny was still going down. Johnny heard a distant whisper of sound. He held up his hand for silence. In the mine! Very faintly he sang back. Air hole! Jenny will open her thighs! Repeat! It came back. Make! Johnny grabbed a long mine drill. He looked for the thinnest place he could, imagining the white rock wall before him. Stuck the drill and put the points into it and signaled for the man on the drill motor. Let her spin! They bucked the drill into it, and with the pressure handles and the others could hear it in there, and they soon got out of the way. With a high scream, the drill went through. They dragged it out. Air hose, yelled Johnny. Same to you, they said. No, air hose. And then they fed a hose through the drill hole and turned the air compressor on. Air from the drift squealed past the sides of the hose and into the rescue crew's faces. 21 minutes later, they had the top of the rock fall cleared and could drag the men out. They had to drop the gap further to get the last one. It was Donaldine, and he had a broken ankle and broken ribs. 17 men, only one with a serious injury. They passed him up to the top silently in hoist buckets. A dust and sweat-covered Johnny was the last one up. The parson threw a blanket around him. The salvage crew were almost bundled up. Sitting in the snow, most of them drinking something hot that one of the old women had sent in a huge jug. The parson had finished setting the ankle of Donaldine, and, helped by Robert the Fox, was taping up the ribs. Finally, Thor said, "We lost the load." Nobody said a word. With dawn making a faint pale line in the east, Johnny looked down into the abyss. The pure white load showed not the slightest trace of gold, and it was in plain sight. When the recon drone came over, Turl would have a picture of this. Far below, as yet invisible in the darkness, a new fall of rock would tell the story. Johnny tried to guess Turl's reaction. It was difficult to do so for Turl. He was undoubtedly over his own edge and into madness. How many hours did Johnny have until the drone? Not many. The air was unaccountably still. The morning wind has not yet started. The dawn light was reflected back from the surrounding majestic peaks. Johnny ran over to the flying platform and gestured to a pilot to join him. He lifted it up, put it over the edge of the chasm, and dropped it like a rocket to the bottom. He braked it and hovered. Turning on the beam lights on the platform, he examined the mass of fallen rock. Some of it had gone through the river ice. Some had made a new bank for the stream. He played the light through the debris. It was an enormous mass. Hopefully he looked for some slightest whiteness that would indicate maybe a piece of the load. There was none. A ton of gold, perhaps, but now it was buried under a mountain of rockfall, possibly even plunged into the river bottom itself. The debris was so peaked and broken one couldn't even land upon it. He tossed around the idea of clearing a flat place, but it would take hours and no winds would be here soon. He had to face it. The gold was gone. The morning wind was beginning to blow now. He couldn't stay down here and lift a tell about it. If he had another short period of morning quiet, he might do something. But they'd used up their time. He sent a flying platform screaming up the cliff top. It was already beginning to get buffeted by the turbulent air. He landed. "Rob the Fox," he said. "Get these men back to town." Johnny walked back and forth. The parson, he was looking at him with sympathy. "We aren't done yet, laddie," said the parson. The whole group looked at me in shock of disappointment. Robert the Fox was looking at Johnny. They were loading the saved crew and 2 pilots. They were still at the controls of the plane. Donaldine was being eased gently aboard. "I'm going to do it," said Johnny. Robert the Fox and the parson walked over. "Turl doesn't know how close that drift was to the inside of that load. He doesn't know that we hadn't already mined the back of it. If he sees that white quartz out there, he'll know we didn't get to it before that slide." "Thor, how close are we to that fissure?" Thor asked the shift leader and did some quick calculations. "About 5 feet. He's Irish for some reason. Thor finally shouted from the plane. "I'll blow it in," says Johnny. "It doesn't matter now if we blast it. I'm going to blow the fuck out of that so it looks like we were through, like we made it to the drift. Take that plane back fast and get me some explosives and a short holder gun." That's what he called his mum. He rattled off the exact explosives needed, and the plane with the salvage crew vibrated, ready to take off. "And bring in the next shift." We got very little time till the recon drone passed. "Fly over, fly fast." It was daylight now, and they could fly as fast as they believed I wanted. The plane roared off the pad. Johnny didn't wait for it to get back before he started to work. He went down the shaft carrying some tools, got out of the bucket at the bottom, and made his way all over the rubble and back into the drift. The crew's equipment was still lying about. The lamps were still on, and Johnny picked up a drill and began to make 6-inch deep holes all around the extreme edges of the white quartz. 2 Scots were picking up other drills and beginning to help him. When he saw what he was doing, he was putting in shot holes. While he worked, he had others of the rescue team clear the remaining equipment out of the drill shaft to take it above. There's no reason to waste it. Only the shift's radio had been smashed in a rockfall. This drift would never be used again, and it might well blow to bits. He was surprised the plane came back so fast. He was in radio contact with the surface, and he told them what he wanted down there. Very shortly, the explosives arrived. He put powerful, molding explosive into each one of the shot hells. Then on top of that, he put a giant concussive-fired blasting cap. On top of that, he packed neutral goo. It was rigged so it would blow outwards toward the cliff face. He went back up to the surface, talking on the radio as he was hoisted aloft. They had a harness and cable rigged, and he went to the cliff edge. He shrugged into the harness. He ignored Robert the Fox's request that somebody else do it. They had not used explosives that much, and Johnny, he knew them well. Using a winch and safety wires, they lowered him over the edge. He found it very easy going down the cliff face, now that it was slightly inclined. He signaled when he was opposite the load, and they halted the lowering winch. Bouncing himself about with his moccasins, why is he still wearing moccasins? Against the cliff, he looked for the pinhole. From inside, he had put a very thin drill all the way through to the outside, and there it was, the tiny hole. It's Patty. It marked the top center of the inside ring of shot holes. The shot holder gun bounced down to him. This was the dicey part. The gun might set off the inside blast with concussion, and if he did it, he'd be blown to bits. But he had no time he just had to drill and get on with it. He made a plastic cable of blasting cord. With the shot holder set at minimum power, he made holes for pins in the back of the load. Getting himself adjusted up and down by the winch with 1,000 feet of chasm gaping below him, he wound the blasting cord around the pins. Presently, he had a big circle on the vane. He fixed an electric firing wire to the cord and let it pay out as he reeled him up. He was pressed for time. It would be at most half an hour before the recon drone came over and his smoke must be cleared. The firing wire was run to the plane. He made everyone, including himself, get into the plane, just in case more of the cliff went. Stand by! He pressed the firing button. Smoke, flame flashed from the cliff face. White course and country rock blasted toward the other wall of the canyon. The ground shook. No more cliff fell off. I like cliff. We're all going on a summer holiday. Do you know he's Indian? Johnny took the plane up and into the height and position the recon drone would be. They had a black hole in the cliffside. It looked like the drift had reached the load. They landed again to look busy and get some equipment out. The smoke of the blast dissipated in the mountain air. The rumble of the drone grew louder in the distance. A very, very hungover Turl was glancing at his drone receiver in his office, woodenly taking the load scans out of the roller. He had slept on the sleep of the very drunk, both last night and this morning, and he had not felt any of the earthquakes, nor had anyone informed him of it since the compound was proof against, any kind of tremor, and had been much more severe in the mountains. What little pleasure he got in life these days was looking at the scan photos, even though they showed only a bit more waste ore around the shaft and just a little bit of activity. Sorry, I need a shot because my hips are killing me. I do love my humming spirits. He was no closer to solving the puzzle as Giant. And this fellow, he arrived and he still didn't know what the hell he was doing. The endless searching and trying to figure out the reason the IBI might have an interest here. It had cost Turl weight, had sunken in and had dulled his eyes, and he had put a tremor in his talons whenever he lifted the all too frequent Cabango saucepans to his mouth bones. His hatred of this planet, with its accursed blue skies, the white mountains deepened day by day. This routine moment at the scanner, taken only after locking all doors, checking with a debug probe, and his only hopeful instant for this day was seeing the load in operation. Turl raised the scan picture to the light. It took him a moment or two to realize today it was different. Then he quivered with abrupt shock. The face of the cliff had avalanched. There was no load. He didn't have yesterday's pictures. He always tore them up promptly. He tried to estimate how much of the face was gone. The incline, it was different. He couldn't estimate how deep the shear-off had cut into the cliff. There was a hole. That would be the drift. They had been drifting along the vein. He was about to put the photo down to think about it, then noticed the mineral-sized trace scan. The primary purpose of the recon drone was not just surveillance. It scanned ceaselessly for minerals, and it recorded them on a trace. This trace was different. Indeed, it was different. He knew the low trace, the jagged spectrum for gold. He quickly ran the trace into the analyzing machine. Sulfur? There was no sulfur in that load. That gold was not a sulfide gold compound. Carbon? Fluorine? What was the name of crap nebula? None of these minerals were in that area. He wondered whether he was looking at the S6 common mineral formula. The silo was called triglycerides. None of the explosives or fuels were imported from Silo. They were dangerous to tranship and easy to make on this planet. The little factory stood about 10 miles south of the compound, served by the power lines from the distant dam, and every now and then a crew went down there to combine the elements into fuel cartridges and to make explosives. So all these elements were present on this planet. He ran it through the scanner again to get the exact mix of the balance. Triglycerides. Turl's unbalanced wits instantly leaped to the wrong conclusion. Triglyceride was the commonest trace one got around any silo mine. It would always be unusual not to find it hanging in the rocks and the airs after blasting. He leaped from his chair, ripped the scan photo to bits in his savage paws. He threw down the fragments and stamped upon them. He pounded his fist against the wall. The vicious, rotten animals had blown the face of the cliff off just to spite him, just to get even with him. They destroyed his load. He collapsed into the chair. He heard a knocking at the door. Chirk's hurried voice. "Whatever is the matter, Turl?" Suddenly he realized he must get control of himself. He must be very cold, very clever. "The machine broke," he shouted. Clever explanation. She went away. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. He felt cool, dispassionate, masterful. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, knew it step by step. He would have to remove all possible threats to his life. He would have to cover all traces. First, he would commit the perfect crime. He had all worked out. Then he would release the drone and exterminate the animals. His talons were still shaking just a little bit. He knew it would make him feel much better if he went out and killed those two females. He had that planned for day 94. He would make a couple of explosive collars for the horses, and then he would lead the horses up to the cage and show the females the red blob on the horses' collars was the same as on theirs, and then he would hit a switch and explode a horse's head off. The females would go into terror. Then he'd do it to the other horse. Then he'd pretend to let them loose and step back and blow the smaller female's head off. The amount of terror he could generate would be so delicious. He felt he needed such a boost right now. Then he remembered the animal's psychic powers. That animal up in the hills would know about it and might do something to avoid being killed. No, attractive and needful to his nerves as that might be, he must not indulge himself. He must be cool, masterful, and clever. He had better set the perfect crime in motion right this instant. He got up with deliberate, calm determination and went about it. The perfect crime began by appointing Kerr the deputy head of this planet. It was all done within the hour and distributed and posted. The company rules allowed for a deputy. There was none, and it was only logical that one be appointed. To do this, Turl used the already signed order pages he had gotten from Nymph. In the evening, Turl took Nymph aside, swearing him to strict secrecy, and hinting his swindle-and pay and bonuses funds might be at risk, and he got him to make an appointment with a new employee named Schnitt. He did not inform Nymph that Schnitt was the cover name of Jade of the Imperial Bureau of Investigation. Turl impressed upon Nymph that no one must know of the appointment. It must take place at the hour just before midnight in the administration compound. He also didn't mention that the offices would be deserted at that time. Telling Nymph it was all for his own protection, Turo arranged to be standing behind a curtain in Nymph's office when Jade arrived. With very expert care, Turo had oiled and charged an assassin gun, a silent weapon. He had also prepared 2 remote explosion blasting caps. Just before the appointment time, Turo told Nymph to be sure his handgun was loaded and ready in his lap. This frightened Nymph quite a bit, but Turo had said, "I'll be right behind this curtain, protecting you." Nymph was at his desk, gun in his lap. Turo was behind the curtain. The hour of the appointment arrived. So far Turo had been calm and masterful, but as he waited his nerves were playing tricks upon him and making his eyebones twitch. What if Jade didn't come? A dreadful minute went by, then another. Jade was late. Then, with a relief for Turo, the slither of footsteps in the outside hall. Of course, Jade must have been putting on a robe and putting a probe around the area to see whether it was free of surveillance devices. What a fool, thought Turo logically. Turo had already done that, and very thoroughly too. There was no surveillance devices in this bloody place. The door stayed open, and Jade came in. His head was down. He had not even bothered to change out of his tattered ore-sorting clothes. "You sent for me, your planet ship?" As he had been coached, Nymph said, "Are you certain that no one knows you're here?" "Yes, your planet ship." He stepped out from behind the curtain and walked forward. "Hello, Jade," said Turo. The fellow was jolted. He looked up. "Turo? Turo, is that you?" IBI agents were trained. They never forgot a face. Turo knew the fellow had not seen him for years and years, and then only as a security student in mine school. And that was just when Jade had come for investigating a minor crime. One interview, that was all. But it didn't fool Turo. He knew Jade must have studied the photographs and records of every executive here, and especially the security chiefs. Turo smiled disdainfully. Then Jade saw the assassin's pistol at Turo's side. He stepped back. He raised his mangy paws. "Wait, Turo, you don't understand." What was he trying to do? Open his shirt? Reach for a secret weapon? It made no difference. Turo stepped into position, raised the gun, pointing it in a direct line from Nymph to Jade. Turo fired one accurate, deadly shot straight into Jade's heart. Jade was still trying to say something, some protest. He was a dead, crumpled, mangy mass upon the green-stained carpet. Turo thrilled a bit with the murder. Jade had been afraid it was delicious. But this was no time for self-indulgence. A calm, masterful Turo turned to Nymph. Nymph was sitting there in terror. Turo thought it was so delicious. But he had a job to do. "Don't worry, Nymph. That fellow was an agent of the IBI come to smack you out. He hasn't. You're safe. I have saved your life." Nymph tremblingly laid his own gun down upon the desktop. He was panting, but much relieved. Turo walked up to the side of Nymph that held the gun, raised the assassin gun quickly. Nymph's eyes shot wide, his mouth open in incredulity. Turo pushed the muzzle of the silent weapon against Nymph's head and pulled the firing catch. The jolt knocked Nymph sideways. Green blood began to pour from a wound that went all the way through his head. A calm, completely in charge, cool Turo steadied the body and then tipped it forward so it fell across the desk. He arranged his still twitching arm so that it might have fired the shot. The twitches stopped. Nymph was dead. Working with precision and care, he put a remote-controlled blast cap in the barrel of Nymph's gun. Turo produced a new weapon from his boot. He went over to Jade's body and put the stiffening paw around the butt of it. Into the muzzle of Jade's gun, he put the second remote-controlled cap. He walked around. It was all in order. Walking casually but very silently, he went out to the nearby empty recreation hall, entering as though just coming in from outside, even taking off his breathe mask. He ordered a saucepan of cabango from the attendant. It was Turl's usual routine. He was a little surprised to notice that he didn't need the cabango this night. After a few minutes, when the yawning attendant was hinting he wanted to close up, and was letting down the blind in preparation for the morrow, Turl casually put his hand in his pocket. He pressed the first remote. Far off, there was a muzzled explosion. The attendant looked up, listening. Looking toward the other end of the compound, Turl pressed the second remote. That sounded like gunfire! Sounded the attendant was shot up. A door slammed somewhere. Somebody else had heard it. It did, didn't it? He stood up. Sounded like it was in the compound. Let's go and have a look and see if we can find it. With the attendant in his wake, Turl started running through the birthing areas, opening doors. Did a shot go off in here? He was barking at Star with just awakening silos. Some of them had heard the gunshots too. Where did it sound like it came from? Where did it come from? Some pointed towards the administration building. Turl thanked them and efficiently went ploughing off in that direction, followed by a crowd of silos. He industriously searched through the offices, turning on lights. The crowd was also searching. Somebody yelled from the corridor, "They're in here! They're in here!" Turl let a lot of fellows go in there first. Then he went ploughing through them. "Who is it? Where?" They babbled at him, pointing in through the open door. The two bodies were in view. Char was regarding him sourly from just inside the door. He made as if to walk forward. Turl swept him back. "Don't touch anything. As security chief, I am in charge. Here. Back the fuck off." He went over to the bodies, one after the other. "Anybody recognize this one?" he said, pointing to Jared's body. After a moment from craning necks, "I think his name's Schnitt. Don't really know." "They're both dead," said Turl. "Call for some stretchers. I'll record this." He took out a picture recorder and he put it on Nump's desk. As always, Turl whirled it around the room, recording everybody. "I want statements from each and every one of you." Somebody had called the medical staff. They had heard the shots and they were prompt. They loaded the bodies onto the stretchers. "Take them directly to the morgue, unless you want to examine them first." The boss said to the medical chief, "Blast gun wounds. Pretty obvious, really." "Move along," says Turl. "It's all over." Tomorrow morning he would write his report, all backed by witness statements. An agent of the IBI, recognized by the keen-eyed Turl, had not seen fit to announce himself to the planet's security chief, but, proceeding alone, had apparently visited Nymph late in the evening, and possibly had attempted a foolhardy, single-handed arrest. Nymph had shot him with a hidden gun, and then committed suicide. Turl had now followed through, seeing whether Nymph were guilty of some crime, and while he continued the investigation, he'd begun it long ago. He had found a pay swindle. Papers and evidence are at hand. Meanwhile, Turl respectfully submitted all was under control. A competent, experienced deputy called Nymph had earlier appointed. He's not that experienced, but he'll do the job. The bodies will be en route. Next semi-annual firing day, day 92. Tomorrow afternoon, as soon as he had verified the animals were still there, he would launch the drone. He would obliterate the foolish experiment Nymph had been engaged upon. All evidence would be covered, all tracks obliterated. Whatever Jade had been after, it made no difference now. Turl felt very calm, very cool, very masterful. He had brought off the perfect crime. It was odd that he couldn't sleep, and he kept twitching.